Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Wilson, a senior editor on the Amazon Books team, and I have been waiting for this fishbowl all year. Today's guest is something of a Renaissance man. He's an accomplished trumpet player, a book lover, he's an actor, a philanthropist, and he's also the brilliant bassist of one of the greatest bands of our time, the Red Hot Chili Peppers. It's written. He's here today to talk about his memoir, Acid for the Children. This chronicles his childhood and the years leading up to what he calls chili pepper time. Please join me in welcoming Flea to the stage.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. I read it. I loved it.
Just to start, I just want to thank everybody so much for caring about literature, for caring about books, not just my book, but any book. Our stories bring us together, and I'm so honored. And from the get-go of writing this book, it meant everything in the world for me and was extremely fucking deeply humbling to try to earnestly and artfully contribute to the world of literature. And books have been a guiding light for me all my life, and to have the opportunity to use a book as a vehicle to express a part of myself that I don't normally get to express is a great, great, great honor, and I never took it lightly, and I don't. So thank you so much for coming and caring. It means a lot. Thank you.
So you say in the first chapter that you hope to come out of this writing experience feeling clear and cleansed. How are you feeling?
Clear and cleansed. Yeah, the writing itself, I didn't know what it was going to be when I started. And when I wrote that was like me, like, what am I faced with, And when I started writing the book, I intended to write a book only about the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I thought it would be arrogant for me to write about the rest of my life, because every one of us has a story, every one of us hurts, every one of us yearns and hopes, and I just didn't think that my story would be any more important than anyone else's, so I thought people are interested in the Chili Peppers, and even though I knew I would write from an interior place that would be, my relationship to it, my growth within it, I wasn't going to write about my childhood at all. Yet, once I sat down, started writing about my childhood, and not just, writing the narrative about the things that happened, but yearning to get underneath and to understand what it was, what guided me, what shaped me, what made everything move. These things that were just maybe little images or little flashes of dialogue or things in my head, when I shone light on them and started writing about them, they became really clear. And it was a very powerful and moving thing for me to see myself as a kid, because I'm a grown-ass man, and I have some degree of objectivity about my childhood. So for me to, we always feel our childhood in everything we do, everywhere we go. It's these little things that guide us, that we're scared of, that cause us comfort and distress. And we don't even realize it. So for me to look at it and to attempt to understand it, like to look at little me searching for my moral compass, searching to make sense of a world that seemed hypocritical and cruel, all of those things were cleansing. And they were, even though, I've got a lot of fucking cleansing to do, it was very much, it was very therapeutic, yeah.
That was one of the things I found the most remarkable about your book and your story, is how incredibly introspective you are looking back on it, and just your willingness to say, I was a bully, I did this, I did that, I wish I would have done this differently, and to be vulnerable with your feelings of being hurt and loneliness. And that seems like it's incredibly challenging to do that and put it out for millions of people to read. Were you uncomfortable doing that, or just felt
When
like
I
you
was
could do it?
writing it, it was just fun.
Okay.
Like, I just fell in love with the act of writing. I highly recommend it, you guys. Like, just sitting there, putting pen to paper, even though it was difficult to get started sometimes, every time I would sit down and write, when I stopped, when I lifted my head up, I felt like charged in a way that I'd never felt before. I felt like it engaged a part of my creativity that, even though my whole life was dedicated to trying to be effective creatively through music or through whatever art form I've been a part of, writing engaged a new part of me. And it was so exciting to do that. So I knew that the only chance that I had of writing a book that would be effective and be, to fulfill my hopes of writing a book that could rely on its own, just being a book, just a piece of literature without any fame or any rock stardom or any salacious stories or anything like trying to get clickbait or any shit like that. Like just wanting to write something beautiful, I knew I had to be. I knew two things. I had to write everything, every word, and I had to be completely, had to be my voice in every aspect of it. But I had to be absolutely vulnerable and honest. And that meant coming to terms with things about myself that I don't like. And it meant also like coming to terms with the things about myself that I love, that I've been scared and running from. And, willing to be a conduit for divine honesty, and hoping that that could flow through me and come to the page. And, I prayed for that every time I put pen to paper.
That was one of the things I thought about also after I'd read it and sat with it for a while, is that you're so forthcoming with all of these things, maybe bad decisions, things like that during this time period. But what are you most proud of during that time?
About my childhood?
And the years after, in your 20s.
Yeah, well, I guess like writing about it and learning about myself through writing about it, the thing that I'm most proud of is like, forgive me, I get a little emotional sometimes. I got married a few weeks ago, and, when I first met my wife, we just met and we're falling in love, and it's just this tidal wave of feeling. And I had the manuscript for my book, and I said, I just wrote this book. So the book was done like a year ago, and because of some personal family reasons and stuff, I didn't put it out for a year. But I gave it to her to read, and she said she liked it, and she was, that was really cool that I wrote that, and it was touching and stuff. But one of the things she said, and that a few people have said to me, is, how are you alive? Yeah. Like you're so lucky to be alive. So I guess that looking at it, the thing that I'm really proud of is, one, to be alive, of course. I get to be here. I had great breakfast this morning. But also that through all these things, like through my childhood, through, when I was just a street rat and I was shooting drugs and I was doing all this like moronic things, and through the very tumultuous domestic life, my family life was not a safe place to be when I was a kid. I always had this thing inside me. I had a light, I had a love, and that I was able, when I look back at it, that I was able to follow it, And though I lost my way, and I acted like an asshole many a time, and I beat myself up, and I was thoughtless and insensitive to other people, I always came back to it. And I think when I look at that no matter what went on, I always came back to this thing that I knew was good, that I knew was beautiful, that I saw in the great music that I loved, in the great books that I read, in the great films that I saw, in the profound connection that my favorite athletes share in their telepathic heart connections. Like all of those things, I was able to come back to that and follow that light. So in that way, that's probably the thing I'm most proud of, I guess.
You really do feel like how big your heart is when you read this, and how much you do care about the people close to you and your close friendships.
Thank you.
The style of your book is so interesting and unique, just the way that you do express so much of yourself, and also the little musings and just dropping in little tidbits, and there's a couple letters. Was that something you always kind of envisioned for how your memoir would go, or the flow?
No, I found my rhythm as I went. When I initially wrote, everything was just this sprawling, ranting poem kind of thing. It was a real stream of consciousness, and I had a good style to it. I think, it was valuable. But when a couple of people told me the same thing. Patti Smith, who wrote the intro for my book, she told me, and she was a great supporter, and so such a you know, like whenever I had doubt about it, she was always like, Flea, you can do this, you're a natural, you're a writer. And that was before I put a word to paper, and she didn't know I could write shit, you know. But she told me that, and like halfway through, she said it afterwards. She's, you know, she was just such a great supporter and someone I respect so much. It meant a lot. But she told me in the beginning, she said, Flea, just think of it like music. You know, you have to know when to vamp, you have to know when to stretch out and solo, you have to know when to lay back, you have to know when to push. You know, and she put it in musical terms. That really resonated. And then when my editor, David Ritz, who was a great, great help to me, and when I wrote the sprawling poem, he was like, man, this is great, it's wild, but it's difficult to read, you know, and it's only very few people, and I'm like cool with that. I don't mind just touching a few if it's a few that care, you know, but as I wrote on, he goes, what you're writing is beautiful, and if you intend to communicate it, you really want to touch people's hearts, you have to find a clean rhythm that people can dance to, you know? And so in terms of just being writerly, when I thought of that, I started, you know, paring it down and finding these like bursts of rhythm. Like it's just, to me, it's rhythm, you know? And all the ways that I wrote, like the little, when I use ellipses, I learned that word, ellipses. I used fucking semicolons, for crying out loud. You know, I learned about writing, and I you know, in my like really sincere desire to learn and to be good, I found my voice, you know, yeah.
You apologized to Kurt Vonnegut Jr. for the semicolons.
I
at the
did,
beginning.
yeah, because when I was a kid, I really loved Kurt Vonnegut Jr. I still do, of course, but he was like a real guiding light for me when I was a kid. And he always said that semicolons were the most pretentious, stupid, useless things that anyone could ever put on a page. And I loved him so much. So, but then I started using it, and I was like, well, it feels kind of good to be pretentious, you know. Yeah, and, you know, sometimes people you love say things you don't agree with. I remember Don Van Vliet, also known the great musical pioneer of the great band Captain Beefheart, kind of put down Charlie Parker when they asked him if he liked Charlie Parker. He goes, fish have scales. There's too many scales. I just like fish with scales. Kind of like saying that Charlie Parker was being making too much use of harmonic invention with too many scales and chords and stuff. And, you know, Charlie Parker is a great genius, virtuoso of the century. So I don't agree with him either. And I love him to death.
So why did you choose to end your memoir where you did? I mean, I love the way the sort of the serendipity of all of it. You were reading a book, came to a decision, got a phone call, and then you end it right before.
I end it the day the band starts.
Yes,
yeah.
Your first show before it became.
And because once I decided that just writing about my childhood was enough, the Red Hot Chili Peppers starting is such a massive turning point in my life. It's a watershed moment for me where, you know, me and my most beloved friends, who I'd known forever, who I'd run the street with, who I'd done everything with, we find this means of expression that is beyond, like I say in the book, it's beyond construct. It was never planned. It was never thought out. It was never anything. It just flowed naturally. We just got out of the way and let it happen. But like I said before, when I decided just to write about my childhood, because one, I mean, I reacted against the idea of any kind of rock star book too, because I don't care about being a rock star. I've been around that shit all my life, or for all my adult life, and rock stardom as a whole is a pretty pathetic, boring thing as far as I can see. But so, you know, I reacted to that. Like, I just wanted to write a book, and I didn't want to write about rock stardom. But I also, you know, I'm objective about my childhood. I could write about my childhood. It's over. I could look at it. I could write about it. And I thought, like, to the answer to people who want to know about the Chili Peppers, like, for me, the way that I grew up, the way that I was on the street, the way that I was yearning for love because I didn't have a stable family home, the quietness of my thoughts, the hope that I had as a kid to deal with all the, you know, trying to navigate all the difficult things that I had to navigate, and meeting my friends and bonding so fiercely, you know, is the answer to me of why the band existed more than anything I could say after the band started. You know, after the band started, yes, there's a lot of growth and learning about craftsmanship and making asses of ourselves and also being, you know, like noble and brave. But it's a band is a sacred fucking thing, and you know, Mike, you don't. It's not something you can fuck with. And for me, the answer and the core essence of the sacred thing that made it work. For me, was in my childhood and in the way I grew up and in the connections that I forged with my friends.
And you talk about that too in the book, that if things hadn't gone the way that they had, even between you, you know, with the sort of the changing, the conflicts, quitting, rejoining, just the way that your friendship evolved, that things wouldn't have gotten where they were, that it sort of took all of those bumpy roads to get to that yellow brick road.
Yeah, well, as George Clinton says, if there weren't any humps, there wouldn't be any getting over. You know, when we all know that without failing and without being willing to like fail and abjectly and be humiliated and embarrassed by your failure, you can never really enjoy the depth of success and a true feeling of success. But yeah, there all are these. It's like that sliding glass doors or whatever that movie is, you know, where these like alternate realities that could be. And the big one for me is, you know, when I was a kid, I was born in Australia. My father worked for the Australian government. He wore a suit every day. He had a briefcase. He went to work. We left Australia because he got an assignment at the Australian consulate in New York. We went to New York, where, you know, he took the subway to work every day. We lived in a nice upscale New York suburb, and you know, we had dinner every night at 7. Played golf on the weekends. It was all very proper. Everything was done by the book. My dad ran a very tight ship in almost a militant way. And then 2 years into that trip, we're supposed to be there for 4 years, go back to Australia. 2 years into it, my mom leaves him for a junkie jazz musician who lives in his parents' basement. You know, so my dad leaves back to Australia without us. We move into this junkie jazz musician's, you know, basement. And from that point on, I'm like 7 years old, 6, 7 years old, I become a street kid. I'm unwatched, I'm wild, I'm untethered, I'm feral, I'm up to no good. You know, I'm up to good too, because I find great meaning in my solitude and the things that I love, like, you know, books and music and basketball. But, you know, because of that, you know, it's not health. Every kid wants structure. Every kid wants love. Every kid wants to be guided into being an adult from their parents. But there's something about not having that too. And like for me, I looked for a profound love in the people that I met in the street, in my friends, in the kids I got into trouble with, in the kids I was doing drugs with, and, you know, petty thievery and all the bullshit stupid shit we got into. And because of those, like, I looked, that's where I found my feeling of family and the people I could really relate to and express everything to. And so because of that shift where my parents split up and I end up being this like wild street kid and we moved to LA for my stepdad's music career, I ended up, you know, though making a lot of mistakes, it being difficult to grow up and become an adult and, you know, become a responsible human being. I also was able to explore a freedom in a way that I would not have been able to do otherwise. And so without that like massive break that flipped my life upside down, that's kind of the thing that I really look at more than anything, as like it opened me up to a whole nother, and I fell in love with music, you know, because he was a jazz musician, and that just blew my mind out of the, you know, to the cosmos when I heard that.
And that really seems like it's been a through line for you, that when Walter kind of introduced you to jazz, that became something that you took solace in, and then when you began playing the trumpet, that was a place that you went for comfort, and that's something that has continued through your life and interest. And do you seek out new musicians, or is that something you're still?
I'm always seeking. Yeah, it's one of the hardest things for me about having a very busy professional life, which I do, you know, with Chili Peppers mainly, you know, other musical projects that I do, acting in films, you know, now writing stuff. Like every creative adventure that I embark on opens me up and I learn, and I become a better person. I become deeper, I become kinder, I become more compassionate, I become more understanding. But sometimes in being so busy, I don't get the time to just do new things, to risk falling on my face. And I'm always searching and looking for that, for new musicians to play with, for new creative ways of expression, for just ways to grow. Like I'm such a student, I'm a student of creativity, and bring it on. I want it.
And as a student, you found a lot of, you enjoyed school for the music program, right? Going to school, and you talk about an experience of returning to your high school, and there's no musical instruments, there's nothing. It's just sort of an empty classroom, and how sad that made you. And so you did something about it. Tell us about Silver Lake Conservatory of Music.
Yeah, one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I was kind of a wild kid, and if you read the book, I write about it, and you get the message. But one of the, I was a class-cutting, non-going to school, you go smoke an ounce of weed and then think about school later kind of kid. But the reason that I went every day was because I got to play trumpet in the marching band, in the jazz band, in the orchestra, and the musical productions, and anything, and nothing could soothe the chaos or the discordant feelings within me better than holding that trumpet up to my lips and trying to make something beautiful come out of it. And it gave me a feeling of connection to something much bigger than myself. And cut to, I end up becoming a professional musician, being in a band. I think it was late 90s or whatever, the Chili Peppers had already become, made a lot of money and been successful and stuff. And I was at a basketball game in New York. I'm sitting next to this woman, and she says, hey, I'm the music teacher at Fairfax High where you went. And, my mind was blown, and she asked me to come back to that school and speak to the kids about the viability of a career in music. I go to do it, and just this room that used to be so alive, like filled every day with 80 kids all blowing instruments, and some were great and some were awful, but everybody was trying, everyone was playing, and everyone was, playing together. And I walk into this room, and there's nothing. No instruments, no music stands, no orchestra, no band, no jazz band, just a volunteer teacher with a boombox talking about music. And it really broke my heart because it meant so much to me to have that opportunity as a kid. So, and I know that, I'm one of many, many kids where they have that type of intelligence. Like that's where their connection and their diligence and their self-worth is going to be. And so it just broke my heart. And a couple things that happened after that, but then I just became determined to start a music school to try to fill the void, because in 1980, when I graduated high school, due to Reaganomics, they cut all the arts programs, the funding for arts programs in Los Angeles public schools. And I'm not sure how far that net of what I consider to be child abuse, depriving children from an education, how far that ran. But anyways, I just wanted to do my best to fill the void, so I started a community, a little nonprofit music school in my neighborhood of Silver Lake in Los Angeles. And it's grown and grown, and we ran it out of a storefront for like 15 years, and now we have a beautiful big building with 12 private lesson rooms and 4 ensemble classrooms, and it's just an awesome thing. We have 800 students in there. It's always moving and growing and getting better and flourishing, and we rely on help of so many great musicians who help us do it. We do these fundraisers, and it's just an awesome place. So that's what that is, and it's not a place that's about celebrity or rock stardom or rock music for that matter. It's just about learning instruments, playing in an orchestra, learning about music academically and emotionally and spiritually, and it's a creative hub for kids. It's awesome.
That's great. Do you have any plans to continue expanding that? Would you like to see similar places, across
Yeah,
the
well, I'm
country, around
opening
the
a new
world?
school with some other friends, with my friend Norwood from Fishbone, another guy named David Moss, and a few others. We're opening up a new school in Watts, California, that we're just getting going now, and I'm really excited about that, to be more part of that community.
That's books are one of those things that I feel very strongly about that too. That all kids should have access to books.
Yeah.
And books have always been very important to you. You describe, hiding in the backyard in a rolled-up carpet, pretending you were Huckleberry Finn. tell me about some of the books that have made the biggest impact on you. You list a few in the back, but for those who
Yeah,
haven't already had.
you know, it's kind of fun to make lists. So, you know, I made a list in the back of, I thought of books that really kind of opened up something new in me when I read them. But I don't know, there's so many. You know, I'm reading a great book right now called We Were 8 Years in Power by Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I'm really learning a lot from that book. It's, you know, kind of ripping my heart open, actually. And, you know, just many, many great books. I'm a real big fan of Mikhail Bulgakov, and his book, The Master and the Margarita, has been one of my favorites, you know, since I read it 20 years ago or something. There's a great book called Sacred Hunger by Barry Unsworth that I really like. You know, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte has always been one of my favorites, and if anyone asks me what my favorite book is, I often say that, even though I can't, you know, I can't really quantify books in terms of favorites and not, but that really affected me a lot. I actually made a little record in my garage once called Helen Burns, which is based on a character from Jane Eyre. Yeah.
What do you go to when you just need like a book to escape into? Is there a genre? Like
Anything my sister recommends.
ah,
Yeah,
okay.
I have a very literate sister, and you know, all of our life we've shared a real deep love for novels, and she always just recommends me the greatest books. Yeah.
You did a celebrity picks for our blog for the Amazon Book Review, and your list was one of our favorites. It's just this great eclectic mix of
Oh, cool!
books
Thank you.
and your stories. Is there anything you're looking forward to reading that you know of coming out now that you're in the publishing business? You know,
Yeah. Well, now that I'm an author.
got the inside track.
No, I don't know. I just bought 2 books of the new short stories by Zadie Smith. For my wife and I have a book club. It's a 2-man book club. That's how I busted a move on her. I offered her to join a 2-man book club. I'm telling you, it works. Again, you know, it's a good move. So I'm excited to read that because I read White Teeth by Zadie Smith and really loved that book a lot. So I'm looking forward to her book of short stories.
You talk in your book about that you feel like books may have been one of the things that kind of kept you sane, that you wanted to always be able to continue reading so you couldn't get too wasted. So, you know, sometimes you were, but are you still a daily reader?
Pardon?
Do you still read every day? If you can?
Since I learned how to read, I've read every day. I read every day. And for me, it's funny, I was doing a talk with another talk last week, and there's this one part of the book that, you know, I'm writing about kind of a series of things that were very traumatic for me, and where I felt lost and confused and dazed and just kind of lost in the world. And I was worried that maybe I was writing too much about, you know, all these difficulties, because I know I had a lot of beautiful, awesome days in my childhood. And I wrote this one book, this one little chapter. It's like a page long. I don't even know if you can call it a chapter. I write these little kind of short stories. And I write about this day that's just really beautiful. You know, I have this perfect day. I'm like bouncing my basketball through the cracks in the sidewalk onto school, watching it bounce up and down, feeling it. The sun's shining. I get to school. I did an oral report about Hector Berlioz and the Symphonie Fantastique and got an A+. I built up the nerve to talk to a girl that I had a crush on, and she was friendly to me. I went home, and, you know, no one was home, and I had solitude, and I watched the Laker game, made myself some spaghetti, read my Kurt Vonnegut book, and fell asleep like happy. And I write about this day, and when I did this talk the other day, the moderator, he asked me, he goes, will you read this little part? And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to go start sobbing again in front of everybody. But it's this really light part of the book. It's this book, this beautiful day. And I was like, why does he want me to read this? This is like the most like a kind of, it's a light and happy little section. You know, no one ever wants light and happy, you know. And then he said to me, he goes, the thing that strikes me about this thing is all through the book, you're talking about adults and feeling like they're failing you, that they're hurting you, that you run into predatory ones, that you feel neglected, misunderstood, you're not having profound connection at all with the adults in your life. And it's striking to me that all your happiness is in this solitude that you're describing on this day. And well, outside of, the school stuff, but that I feel safe at home because no one's there. And to get to your question, I guess my point is that, what was your question?
I can't remember either.
I can't remember either, but I'm sorry, because sometimes I start the question and I go around because I'm going to get to the answer. But I think that my point was just that in my solitude, and you're talking about books, and when did I start reading and how much I read, like it meant books guided me as much or more, and continue to, more than anything else in my life. And all I wish for all of us, so much, especially, God, all of us are so distracted, and I know I could moan and whine on like everyone else about how much we're all staring at our phones and not engaging and stuff. But the way that we're able to connect with each other through the craftsmanship of books, I think is our savior, It's how we understand. It's how we heal divide. It's how, we're dealing with a time in this country where people fucking hate each other. And there's no meaningful discussion between liberal and conservative. And, people aren't talking. It's like right now I'm reading this Ta-Nehisi Coates book, and I'm learning about our country being founded and based on white supremacy and how it bleeds through every institution and every part of our lives, and how we're blind to it and we accept it, but it shouldn't be how it is. And I'm learning, and we all learn from everything that we read, and it's just so important. And I'm grateful that through my life I've always had this gift, and that a lot of my book, ultimately my book is a story of love. It's about yearning for it and getting distracted and being afraid and being hurt and going off but always trying to come back to it. But also, it's about me trying to find my moral compass as a human being. And in that search, it's books that aided me. Like when I talk about loving Kurt Vonnegut Jr. as a kid, it's not just because it was a good book. It was because he was parenting me. He was showing me what it was to be a good human being. So my point is that, books are good. Yes, I read them.
I have a million questions, but we have to get some time for audience questions. So if people want to go ahead and head up to the mic, and since I guess I can only ask you one more, at the end, Flea Volume 2. Please tell me that is really happening.
When I wrote that, I was certain that was what I was going to do, because when I talked about initially writing the book as a big sprawling poem, I did write all the way through to 20 years into the Chili Peppers career. But I don't know, I'm on the fence about it now. I love writing, and there's so much stuff I think every day about stuff I want to write. But I don't know. I can't promise now because I just don't know. But I do know that, writing this book it made me feel so vulnerable and terrified. I went through, so much anxiety about putting it out. When I was doing the audio book, and I was sitting in the room, I said something to this earlier today, I was just saying it, and I'm sitting in this little audio booth, and a good friend of mine is producing the book, and the engineer, and just the three of us in the room, and I'm reading the book out loud, and I'm going through all these things, and it's all meaningful to me, and I'm thinking, God, I'm going to read this part. These guys are going to think I'm so fucking weird, And I'm like, oh, shit! This is not just for them. Everybody's going to read this. And it's just a really vulnerable feeling. But if all the anxiety that I felt about it and all the fear, since I put this book out, a little over a week ago now, I've been met with such a river of love, and it's really, touching. And I'm so grateful to have shared my story. And I just, I don't know about the future, but I just hope that this one can be of purpose in helping people to feel less alone.
I think you've it has and will inspire a lot of people. So I hope we get to